Last week we left off where Jesus healed a nobleman's son. He used this miracle on the basis of faith and trust in him and his word only, not signs and not wonders. This nobleman put all his trust and faith in him when Jesus told him to go, your son lives, which meant to go home without the healer. He was empty-handed going, and that took a lot of faith. Traveling home, he was met by his servants, and they told him, your son lives. This impacted him greatly, that he believed in Jesus. And we know that he trusted in him and put all his faith in him, but he believed in him and who he was. And this impact on this nobleman's life impacted his family too, and they believed also. And the reason John writes these miracles in his gospel is so that whoever reads it will believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. And by believing in his name, they will be saved. So now we enter in the third miracle that Jesus does as he enters into the city of Jerusalem. Let's begin on verse 1 of chapter 5. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So after this, meaning the miracle of the nobleman, there was a feast of the Jews, and we're not exactly sure what feast this was because it was not identified by John. But there were 3 feasts that were mandatory for males to go before God, referencing Exodus 23, 14 through 17. The Passover feast, the Feast of Harvest, and the Feasts of Ingathering. And at these feasts, it has been said concerning Jerusalem, studies showed that it would be packed, filled with people, estimated around 250,000 people. And Josephus wrote that he estimated during the feast to be more about 1 to 3 million people. And this was a city, but by our standard, it was more like a small town, perhaps. The city of Clarksville is estimated to be 95.5 square miles with a population of 153,205. Jerusalem in the time of Jesus was 220 acres, or a third of a square mile. And based off a 640 acres equals 1 square mile, that's where I get the third of a square mile. It's about a quarter size of Central Park. And there was estimated to be a population of 40 to 50,000 people. So you can imagine that during the times of the feast, people from everywhere would come, similar to the NFL draft in downtown Nashville last year. There was approximately 500,000 people in one basic area, and they were from all over. And just like the feast, there were people from all over going to one city. And I'm sure it probably did feel like 1 to 3 million people. It was just wall to wall. So Jesus went up to Jerusalem because there was a feast. Verse 2, now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. So the sheep's gate, this would be where all the sheep were brought in by the high priest or the priests for sacrifices. And as you entered in, there was a pool located at the northern side of the Temple Mount called Bethesda, also meaning house of mercy. The cool thing about this pool recorded in the Gospel of John is it was located and excavation began in 1863 through 1876, continued on to 1888 to 1900, and again in 1956. And they uncovered 2 pools side by side, having 4 porches and 1 porch in the middle, thus proving the accuracy of the 5 porches recorded in John's Gospel, which I think is pretty remarkable. And I just wanted to share that too. Now, Jesus comes to Jerusalem, enters through the sheep gate just north of the temple, right by the pools of Bethesda. Verse 3, in these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. Now, these porch areas were filled with a very large number of people, crammed together, laying by the water. All who were blind, sick, lame, paralyzed in the heat of the day. Could you imagine how it might have smelt there? Most of these people needed a caregiver. Majority didn't even have that. But the common thing here that you will see is that everyone there had the same hope. The pool can heal them. When desperate people hear stories of people being healed in Bethesda, desperate people go. Really, what do they have to lose? And they lay waiting and watching for the water to move. Why? Let's look at verse 4. It says, "For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had." Okay, verse 4. Here's what I believe concerning this whole verse. I personally believe that John lays out what the belief was surrounding that pool community. I don't believe that this was written in reflection of his actual belief at all. Here's why I believe this. The pool belief was on the basis of a self-centered, self-serving attitude versus others-centered. In other words, it was dependent on who can get into the water first, and it was sort of like a competition. So this idea for healing forms kind of a me first heart or mind. Jesus taught us to be other-centered, and this kind of contradicts his teachings, which were given to him by the Father. And to reward a me-first attitude with healing based on this kind of a work, verse 1 in, yet the weak was left there without any chance, without, getting healed or a chance with God, without grace. I mean, it just boggles my mind. It, to me, is completely opposite of God's heart and who God is. God is love. And I definitely don't believe that anything done with a me-first heart glorifies God, period. If this was a part of God, I believe Jesus would have acknowledged the pool, but he didn't. And by the way, what has been documented is that there were natural springs below the pool that caused the water to push up and bubble up at times. And that's when the people thought an angel stirred the water. So I believe that this was not of God, but a man-made legend or rumor. Again, this is my personal belief with verse 4, but I wasn't about to just read past it. I wasn't going to ignore it. I would rather put it out there so you know what the Lord revealed to me concerning this scripture. But regardless, the bottom line is that these people believed and waited for their chance to be healed. So moving on. So let's put this all in perspective. We have a large number of sick people, and they were just laying there, crammed together on top of each other by the water, all trying to inch their way that way, maybe sweaty, maybe a little smelly, and with all the noise. Maybe some of them would be in pain and moaning, some just talking and just constant, just with multitudes of people. This is just ongoing. Can you imagine? Or even wonder how long some of these people have been waiting there? Days, months, years? And only one person would be made well? If you were paralyzed or lame, you would be hopeless to be the first one in. I would too. It had to be pretty depressing for them as well. Each time, especially when it stirred up and people were already in the pool before they could even move. But with everyone focused that was surrounding these pools, with everyone focused on the water, waiting to be first, Jesus walks into the scene. And you know what? He ignores the pool completely. Doesn't even mention it. But all of Jesus' attention was drawn to just one. The one who had the greatest need. Now that's the Lord's heart that I know. Amen? And if you agree with me, hit that like button. All right? Now, verse 5. Now, a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. A certain man. It's interesting concerning that word certain. And it is expressed in many ways. But the ones that did stick out was, number one, determined. And also, number two, someone indefinite, not readily movable. And three, one that is fixed. So I believe all these meanings give us a peek to this man who was determined, yet his infirmity made him not readily movable, and was fixed not only in his infirmity, but his circumstance. We don't know exactly what his infirmity was, but we do know that he couldn't walk, he couldn't stand, or move. When you don't move your legs for many years, they become weak, and then they begin to wither. He had his infirmity for 38 years, and not once did he ever make it into the pool. And yet, after 38 years, he was still there. And I'm going to tell you something. If you haven't made it in the pool in 38 years, you're not going to make it in the pool, period. Or at least I can guarantee you won't make it for the next 38 years. Talk about being hopeless. He must have faced disappointment after disappointment for 38 years. And let's face it, this man was completely without hope. And especially if he truly believed that this pool was how God worked. Hopeless. So this man was not only utterly hopeless, but he was in the midst of hopeless people. And verse 6, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in the condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" It's amazing. Jesus saw him lying there in that moment, in the present. Jesus knew how long he had been in that condition. He knew his past. Rather than introductions or small talk, Jesus asked this sick man directly only one question: do you want to be made well? And as I studied and listened to others, talk about this verse or this question, all have pretty much had a mutual consensus saying that of course he wants to be made well. Sounds kind of absurd, doesn't it? Do you want to be made well? But to me, it's not an off question. I recall in Navy leadership, back in my days in the Navy, sometimes with people who have trouble doing their job, we have to determine if this is a can't do or a won't do. Can't do's mean that they want to, but can't for some reason, but they are willing to do whatever it takes to do it right. The won't do's are exactly that. They know how to do it, but won't because they won't adapt to any change that may affect their ways of doing things. And Jesus asked him, "Do you want to be made well?" But you can't. The truth is, not everybody wants to. Maybe it was their livelihood that they have made a living off of. And some people are just not interested. And it was interesting that I saw that David Guzik quoted a commentator and points out that an Eastern beggar often loses a good living by being cured of his disease. So it was a reasonable question that Jesus asked him. And the sick man answered him and said, "Sir, I have no way to put me into the pool. And when the water is stirred, but while I am coming, another steps down before me." Based off his response, it should have been a yes. I see he was focused completely on the pool. If he had only had a man to put him in the water, his problems would be answered. Or if only other people weren't there, then his answers or his problems would be answered. The pool was the answer for his life, yet he was in a hopeless situation. Jesus asked him a closed question, which requires just a basic yes or no kind of answer. Do you want to be made well? Instead, he answers Jesus with why he hasn't been healed or made well. As if Jesus asked him, why haven't you been made well? Maybe this man thought if he told him the why, maybe he will feel sorry enough for me and help me get into the pool. But Jesus didn't ask him that. God knows the predicament he was in. God knows the predicament that we're in. All right? He saw him and knew that he had already been in that condition for a long time. Jesus knows what you're going through. If you're in a storm, whether it's a short or long time. So Jesus instead engages this man with that one important question. Why? Do you want to be made well? I believe so. He would take his eyes off the pool that was his only hope and cause him to focus his eyes onto Jesus and place his hope on him alone. Jesus, understanding that he did want to be made well, he said to him in verse 8, rise, take up your bed, and walk. I can see this command caused the man to look directly at Jesus, and it took his eyes off the pool. And there was something that must have had happened, or he must have seen or heard in Jesus that caused him to respond to his authority. He commanded him to do something that was impossible for him to do on his own strength. As the man processed this, he processed the command that Jesus gave. That moment, his body, his legs, his feet obeyed him for the first time in 38 years. As if every part of the man's body obeyed also Jesus. Verse 9, and immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. So the man obeyed Jesus' command and stood up. He was upright at eye level with people after 38 years. His feet felt the weight of his body again and the texture of the hard ground that his body became very, very familiar with. I mean, he laid on it. He felt a newfound freedom he lost 38 years ago and was no longer hopeless. He even had the strength to carry his bed. That's incredible. I'm just playing. This man wasn't on a bed from like Mattress Firm or Macy's. This was one of those padded roll-up mats, like a yoga mat. But we all can agree that he wasn't doing yoga. But this miracle was unique because Jesus took the initiative. He approached the paralytic guy and asked him if he wanted to be made well and commanded him to rise, take up his bed, and walk. All it took was the command and the man's ability to obey for God to work in this man's life. Obedience to God's command always brings God's response to life, causing us to stand firm and to walk in him. And let me tell you this. God never intends to tell the man to get up just so he can watch him struggle. That is not the heart of God. It's almost blasphemy, but it's not the heart of God. He didn't leave him there not to follow through with him. God's response was giving him the ability to do what God commanded him to do. Amen? Therefore, knowing all this, here's a question. I have one question for you. Why is it easy for us to think that God would not respond to certain commands he gives us in our own lives? We can always agree that God is faithful and to trust in the Lord. But why, when he commands us to do something, which requires us to step out in faith at times, why do we feel that our feet won't land on anything solid. Like we will just fall through a cloud into bigger problems. Well, we have the tendency to respond to God as a paralytic man with why it has been impossible for us to do it, giving every excuse and story. But here's why. Your eyes are fixed on the pool as well. Get your eyes off the pool and off yourself. When God commands you to do something, it's never with the intent to fail you or to embarrass you, because he won't. The man took up his bed and walked. He got up on his feet and walked. We have the word of God. We have the word of God and all his promises. Has he ever failed you? He's never failed me. And he will never fail you too. Amen. So this man is walking, holding onto his bed, but there's a problem. Not only does this take place at a feast when all the males are in town, but to finish verse 9, that day was the Sabbath. There were many religious leaders around, and he was walking around carrying his bedroll on the Sabbath. This was a problem. Well, let's rewind. Did Jesus make 2 mistakes? Uh-oh. Wow. I'll tell you this. Jesus didn't make any mistake, let alone these 2 that we're going to see. This law was an interpretation of the religious leaders. It was not God's law. It's kind of like this. In Exodus 23:12, it says, 6 days you shall do your work, and on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your female servant and the stranger may be refreshed, and not work. From years of traditions, they defined what work was and wrote it in law. So this man who wasn't working in labor was just carrying his mat. In their law, it was considered work. Okay. And without wasting any time, these religious leaders approached him. In verse 10, they said, the Jews therefore said to him who was cured, it is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed. It's funny to me. Here we have a guy who has been lame for 38 years, and none of the religious leaders even noticed him as that guy. I mean, seriously, they have had to have seen him at least more than 1,000 times in 38 years. He was like a fixture at the pool. The only thing they saw was the man breaking a Sabbath law, according to the rabbi's interpretation of God's law. And I will always say that, according to their interpretation. But it wasn't breaking God's law. But how did they miss that? He was walking now. After 38 years, this man was walking. And they looked past it. I just can't. I can't wrap my head around it. And here's why. Because anyone with a heart of compassion would have been blown away and excited for this guy just by seeing him walk. I mean, it's a miracle. And these religious leaders were the guys who supposedly represented God. We see here that they had lost touch, not just with reality, but who God was and is. And often, as a little side note, we can get caught up in doing our own life, in our own routines, even in church circles, getting caught up in just constant church. That we look past others' needs that are standing right in front of us, like we lost reality as well. Numbing our hearts, our heart of compassion and love for others, that even we can misrepresent the Lord. We have to be careful that we don't fall into that. And we do that by surrendering to the Lord every day and fixing our eyes on him. Verse 11, he answered them, he who made me well said to me, take up your bed and walk. Now, come on, you have to smile or kind of giggle about that because, I mean, it's pretty funny. Here we got in verse 9 or 10, these guys completely look past it. In verse 11, The man answered him, "He who made me well." It's like, you see him walking. I'm now standing right here in front of you. I'm well now. Oh, but the man who healed me told me to take up my bed and walk. Wait, did you all want to help me? Did you all want to help get me healed? I haven't heard from you guys in 38 years. I've seen you pass me countless times, and not once have you stopped and asked me if I needed help or healing. Oh well, I'm simply obeying the word from the man who healed me. Not sorry, I'm healed, but I'm well and walking. Thanks for asking. No, now their only concern was, who was it who told you to break the Sabbath law? I mean, come on, guys, literally, just totally, you're like tunnel vision. You totally missed it. Verse 12, they asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk?" Verse 13, it says, "But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place." He did not know who Jesus was. Jesus withdrew himself. And when this guy was experiencing this miracle in his life, completely excited that he was healed, in that place right there, full of people during a feast, he did not know who Jesus was. Jesus slipped out. There was so much going on. Verse 14. This is a cool and an amazing testimony of this guy. It says, afterward, Jesus found him in where? Found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." Jesus came across the man in the temple. With everything that happened, the man went to the temple. It's a good place to start when given a fresh new start in life. The man knew where to go to thank God and worship him for what he did in his life. And Jesus found him there and said to him, "See, you have been made well. You're well, 100%. Your legs and feet, look at them. You're completely healed. You have been made well." Then Jesus says, "Sin no more, lest a worse thing can come upon you." We see that sin was what caused this man's infirmity. He said, "Sin no more, lest a worse thing can come upon you." There is a consequence that comes with sin. We don't exactly know what sin caused this. Could have been alcohol. Could have been that he was drunk and he fell maybe down a really far, steep hill and became paralyzed waist down. We don't know. But my point is, a life of sin will bring consequences that will change one's life forever. And also to continue, even when you have those close calls, like, "Oh man, I almost got pulled over and I'm tipsy," or "Oh man, I should have drove a little slower. Oh man, I almost got into, a fight because of driving on the freeway," whatever the case may be. If we continue on that path, something worse can come, even death. Jesus tells him to sin no more and warns him through reminding him of his past condition, how it can happen again, but worse. Learn from your last 38 years, buddy. It's not worth it. Sin no more. The man departed, in verse 15, and then told the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. Once he knew who he was that healed him, Jesus, he went to the Jews to tell them who made him well. Why? Because he was a tattletale? No, he wasn't a tattletale. I will tell you this, though. Breaking the law of the Sabbath during that time was serious business. It was punishable by being excommunicated from the temple and punishable by death. And apparently the Jews weren't done with him. And to put him to rest and put it all to rest, he went to them and answered the question to who told him to do that. So he can go on with his life. You got to remember, it wasn't but within the same day, maybe hours, that he was healed to being confronted by the Jewish leaders for breaking a Sabbath law. So he told the Jews who healed him and told them to take up his cross, or take up his mat, I'm thinking of another scripture, and walk. This unleashed the bloodhounds. Verse 16, for this reason, the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath. So for this reason, when they say they persecuted Jesus, meaning they were hostile towards Jesus and gave him ill treatment and sought to kill him. In other words, they were searching and trying to discover for a way to kill him. Because, check this out. Look back at verse 16. Look at this. Why were they doing that? Because he had done these, meaning more than one, things, as in carrying his mat and healing the man who's been lame for 38 years, both on the Sabbath. All of a sudden, it mattered to them. Not the man, but only the things that Jesus did for him. Again, they were way off. They completely missed what God did in this man's life. Only God can heal. Only God can heal. They didn't even look at that fact. They were blind and they could not see. You know, sometimes we can get caught up in the matters of life to the point that we can miss what God is doing in the midst of it. We can get our eyes so fixated on other things that it pulls us down, or even pulls us in to sin, or gives us false hope. Our eyes get so fixed on things that it tends to cause us to take our eyes away from Jesus. And that can paralyze us as well. I remember when I was a teenager, Pastor Damian Kyle told me, he said, if you want to be the most depressed person on earth, just keep your eyes on yourself and you will be. And he is absolutely right. Jesus calls out to us and tells us to keep our eyes on him. I mean, it was the main lesson when Peter stepped out in faith outside the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. He kept his eyes on him, but the moment he took his eyes off of Jesus, he began to sink. It's the main lesson there. Even today, with the coronavirus that we're all watching very closely, every day and day by day, sometimes wondering, when is this going to end? Watching the numbers grow, hoping for a vaccine any day. I'll tell you this right now, don't lose hope, or don't even begin to fear. And I will also say, stop waiting for something to happen. Jesus tells us to keep our eyes on him. Our hope is in him, in him alone. So in closing, I encourage you this evening, in your private time, in your quiet time, to turn your eyes upon Jesus. Turn your eyes upon Jesus Christ, and to focus and give attention to him and him alone. Seek him through all situations, for he is our hope, and he is in control. He commands us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And especially in crazy times that we are in right now, the second commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself. I would even go further to his new commandment, love your neighbor as I loved you. It's a sacrificial love. So I would also say in your quiet time, pray for your neighbor. Check on them to see if they are okay. Maybe they are without hope or fear of what's going on. Jesus showed up to the weakest person by the pool. He showed up to them and approached them and brought hope and healing in this man's life. So I urge you, take initiative, reach out to your neighbors, and always, always keep your eyes on the Lord. Pray, seek the Lord, keep your eyes on him, and if he commands you to do something, obey him. I promise you, he won't leave you embarrassed, nor will he ever fail you. Amen. All right, let us pray.